Hello and welcome to another edition of Behind the Lens. I'm your host, Paul Hansen. Today we are going to be speaking with legendary location manager, an old friend of mine, Mr. John Grant. I'm going to bring you in right now, sir. There you are. Hello, how are you?
Good morning. Very well, thank you.
Morning and welcome. Oh, that was supposed to fade out. The music was supposed to fade out and be super professionally sounding, but nope, that didn't happen. It's been a while since I've done it.
Thank you for having me, by the way, Carl. It's very nice of you.
Absolutely. No, and I think one of the main things that when I went to your event, you had a memorial service, pre-memorial services, maybe, I'm not sure what the terminology you were calling it, but you were very vulnerable during that. And I've known you for 10 plus years. It was Audrina that we worked on at Mark Burnett Productions. I was the line producer on that show. And you came in as location manager. I think it was Jesse Kearns from Fear Factor who referred me to you, because I know you'd worked on Fear Factor, and we'll dig into that a little bit later. But we had known each other for a while, and then you had this service for yourself, this event, and I was like, oh, I haven't seen John in a while. Let me go check it out. And I learned things about you that I had not known, even though I had worked with you for a bit of time. And so it was really eye-opening. It was really great to get to know that side of you. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about some of that stuff. That was really the impetus. Because I think it was right after that, I was like, I want to talk to you.
I have to add that it was my friends who I had left behind my will and testament, that had half of it was about what to do for a memorial following my death. And for those of you who don't know, I'm in stage 4 lung cancer with emphysema and a dozen other problems. So I've got basically 2 feet in the grave right now, just more or less biding time. And my friends came to me, the two of the chief people I put in charge of taking care of things on my passing had said, let's do your memorial before you pass so you can enjoy it. And I was like, okay, I want to make it clear that this wasn't my idea, because I don't have a big ego, but all of a sudden this could look like a big ego trip. But it was my friends who were the ones that came to me and said, we want to do this before you pass.
And a celebration of you, right? I think that happens. You don't know all the nice things people say about you once you do go, right? So it's let's celebrate life. You were saying that right before we started recording too. Celebrate life, be positive.
The thing about that is that I've looked at my passing now for about 3-4 years, and I've actually passed 3 different expiration dates. And I have chosen to celebrate as opposed to get all wallowed in sorrow and despair and depression, because I easily could have done that. It's just not me. I am very lucky in my life and my career that I've been able to take pieces of paper that say, let's do this play, or let's do this movie, or let's do this TV show, or let's put on this event, from paper to be able to stand it up. There's not a lot of people that are able to take stuff from off the paper and actually stand it up into a physical happening, whether it be an event, whether it be a movie or a play or a musical or whatever. And I'm very lucky that I know how to do that. And that all comes from the base root of what makes me tick, and that's entertaining people. And I don't know how I ended up here. I figured out very early in my pathway that there's 10 people auditioning for a part in a play or a musical or a show. But for every 10 on stage, there's 10 more back behind the scenes. And I also saw there were 10 people auditioning for every role, and 1 person gets it. So if you didn't have perfect teeth, perfect hair, a good actor who could sing, dance, and act, the triple threat, all that stuff, you're going to be standing backstage pulling ropes. I'd much rather be backstage turning on lights, pulling ropes, and get paid for it, rather than sit around wallowing in, why didn't I get that part? So I figured it out very soon. I can sing, I can dance, I can act. That all went through all the way through college, and even for alumni events and stuff like that. But I'm not a performer. I do say to people, because I am a bit of a jackass, I will tell bad jokes, and I'll break into song periodically with no reason why. But it's all part of this package that comes with what I do and how I do it.
Yeah, I would love to play that. To leading the way here, there's a video that I remember from your event, and I have it here. Now, the one thing I have to figure out is how to bring it in again, because it's been a while since I've actually shared a video.
Now, just as a piece of background, this is a pre-tape for the California On Location Awards. I'd been nominated about 7 or 8 times. And ironically, and not even ironically, and for Audrina, I got a nomination of Location Manager of the Year for Audrina. And before the show, they do a pre-tape with the nominees and such. And this is a pre-tape that we set up for one of those COLA Award nominations. I did win twice. Once for Face Off, which is a reality show for makeup prosthetics.
Right.
And the other was for a show for MTV called The 70s House, in which I found a neighborhood in South Pasadena that allowed us to shoot in a house, more or less like Real World for MTV. Same thing, but it immersed the kids in the 70s existence. So we had about 12 houses on this cul-de-sac, and I prepped the neighborhood really well, and I won the Location Manager of the Year award for that because it was a behemoth of a job. Amazing. But I pulled it off.
Wow. All right. Let's share this video and then we will come right back.
As they say in Hollywood, roll it. Let's go to the tape.
Sound speeds. And got it. And feel it from the top. Action.
State your name for the record.
John Grant for the record.
John Grant for the record. Are you trying to be funny?
I've on occasion been able to go, everything's coming up, roses and daffodils for me. Just kind of comes out. So sit right back and we'll hear a tale of a fateful trip. I love that story. Well, I'm not going anywhere. I still got more songs to sing. Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
Are you being a smartass?
I'm always a smart-ass wise guy.
You're always a smartass wise guy.
Yeah. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye.
So great. So I can see the performer gene in you. That's what I saw in that video when I first saw it. So you decided not to go into performing, but you did perform through college, you were saying?
Yeah. I can sing, act, and dance. And I did that from junior high school all the way through college. I think my crowning achievement, in college, I did 3 or 4 shows. But as a lighting designer, which was my trade in college at the time, I lit 12 of the 15 shows in the 3.5 years I was at the University of Redlands. I chose Redlands because it was a place I could go work. I went to Northridge for a semester and they said you'd be a senior before a master's student before you even saw one lighting plot hung for a show. And I wasn't going to wait 6-7 years to do one show. So I went to Redlands where I could do stuff. I'm from the School of Practical Application. And I think my crowning achievement, though, was the part of Duty in the musical Grease, because we had a great cast and a great time, a great director. And we just had a grand old time doing that show. I love the show, too. I love the show. My girlfriend, not so much. She didn't like the moral values of lack thereof of Sandy. So, but that's a whole nother discussion.
So did you say your mother didn't like it, or who didn't like it?
No, my
your girlfriend didn't like it. Sorry, I missed it.
She just, Sandy is like no morals. She ends up going the low road anyway.
But so your sort of technical skills were really refined at this theater at Redlands, is that correct?
No, and on top of it, if they didn't offer, that's how the School of Practical Application comes in. And it really comes into play about my further education in film and TV, was that if I didn't know how to do it, I would teach myself or seek people that would help me down that garden path. If they didn't offer a class at Redlands, I would go to Los Angeles and find a director or a lighting man or somebody who I could access, and I would do an internship with them so that I could further my academic background. And then it came to film and TV, same thing. I wasn't trained in film and TV like many people in Los Angeles that go to UCLA, USC, School of Cinema, places like that. I taught myself, and I taught myself as a PA. And that's something that I strongly recommend. And I've lectured, I lectured for about 10 years to the Universal USC School of Cinema Directors Summer Program. For about 10 years, I talked to these students about how they're going to further their career. And I said to them, I'll say it again, new directors fresh out the gate can't direct traffic in my book. Unless you know how to make a TV show or direct a film, direct a TV show, unless you know how to do it, your first-time directors are not going to jump in the saddle and say, I'm a director, because I strongly recommend all young directors work from the bottom up as a production assistant, intern, work for free, gather experience, figure out how it's done, because production is like the hub of a wheel. And you've got all these spokes that go out on all the various sides of it. As a PA, you get your feet wet and your hands dirty with all the various spokes of that wheel. You immerse yourself into what other departments do, how they do it and function. And that's how you learn how to direct, is that you know everybody's jobs. Sometimes you've had a little hands-on in everybody's jobs. You're helping load a truck. You're helping carry cable. You're helping set up catering. You're setting up extras holding. All those things you get your feet wet doing is part of what a director overall has to understand and know. Because I've worked with first-time directors. What's that?
Actually being on a set, like how a set works, how everyone works. Because I think maybe, and listen, I took that path. Like I was an intern, I was a production assistant, I did all these things. Meanwhile, saying all the time, I want to be a director. That was in my head what I wanted to do. But without sort of those building blocks and knowing what each job does too, because it gives you the visibility of, oh, that is what a gaffer does, or what a grip does, and what the dolly grip does, right? It gives you all these sort of finer points, but also the politics around it. And you're working out in the real world. We'll talk more about your location management career here in a second too. But I think that advice is really valuable for young and up and coming students, and for people who want to be in the business, because I think a lot where people think, oh, it's just directing the actor, right? That's what directing is, or just telling the story in a way that, but it's not just that. While it does include it, it's not.
Like I said, in my book, you can't direct traffic yet. It's just, you ain't got the tools. I was very lucky that I grew up in and around Hollywood. I went to school at two schools in Hollywood. One of them, LeConte Junior High, was right next door to the former Warner Brothers studio, which is now KTLA, a local station. And KTLA is where they made the Jazz Singer, the first sound film. Later, Warner Brothers moved out to Burbank, but that studio has history. I went to Hollywood High School. And being Hollywood High, we were high profile when it came down to we had sons and daughters of actors, writers, producers, even film critics that were my classmates. And it wasn't unlikely that we had celebrities showing up at our shows to see productions we did. Regis Philbin even reviewed a production we did of Hello, Dolly at Hollywood High because his daughter was in the show. I won't get into the technical part of it, but he was blackmailed into it. But at the same time, Regis was working for a local Channel 7 at the time, doing film and TV reviews. And he came down and gave it a glowing review. So I was very lucky. And from that too, my grandmother worked at Paramount Pictures, and she worked for a very high profile Hollywood producer named Hal Wallace. Hal Wallace produced Casablanca. He produced the Martin and Lewis films. He produced a True Grit, Rooster Cogburn, but he also produced a number of Elvis Presley movies. So my grandmother would bring us Elvis Presley albums because I was 4, 5, 6, 7. She would bring us the records from the movies, and we'd listen to them and play air guitar on our tennis rackets and stuff like that. And every once in a while, she'll say, hey, Elvis is on the lot today. Bring the boys down and let's have lunch. So we'd go to her office, say hello to Mr. Wallace, and go have lunch. Every once in a while, when we'd come back or go to her office, Hal Wallace would say, do you know Elvis Presley? I go, no, but I have all his records. And he goes, would you like to meet him? Yes, I would. He's right there behind the door on a baby grand piano. I'm like, gee. And he picks me up, sets me on his knee, plays a little piano. We chatted a little bit, but over 6 or 7 years, every time we would come to the set, he would come off the set, come over, say hello, pick my little brother up, hold him up. So he knew us by name. He knew me and my brothers by name.
Wow.
And that was special. That was really special because fast forward now to about 2000, the year 1999, 2000, I'm doing the show Roswell on the Paramount lot. And as we got out of a van one day, I said, oh, yeah, that's the soundstage they shot Sunset Boulevard on. Oh, and that one over there, I saw Elvis on that stage when he was filming Kissin' Cousins or Roustabout. The producer of which was, what? You knew Elvis? Oh, yeah, no, when I was a kid. So I became this celebrity with our producer who was a huge Elvis fan. But while we were walking to and from the various places on the lot, like to the commissary and such, we'd walk through the exterior sets for Bonanza, which was at the time my favorite TV show. And I was thrilled to be on the set of Bonanza. But one thing I learned on that set, there was like 200 people between the crew, 50 extras, horses, wagons. It was a big deal. How quiet it was. When they said, okay, everybody quiet, here we go, you could hear a pin drop with 200 people within 100 feet of me. You could hear a pin drop. So I realized how important it was that with the discipline it's necessary to be on a set. Now I say the word discipline, and I underline that discipline is the key to success. If you are going to be an entity in the film and TV industry or theater, you have to have discipline. You have to show up on time. You have to be prepared for a meeting, be prepared with your lines memorized, be prepared with your designs done. You have all these things you have to do to be prepared and be ready. Part of it is I was a Boy Scout. Their motto is be prepared. That's the whole thing about discipline. You know that if you have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock or 2 o'clock, you got to go to bed in a timely manner so you get a night's sleep so that you're showing up ready for the day and not with an hour and a half sleep. And if you like to party and all those things like that's all fine and dandy. There will be time for that, but not when you're in the middle of production. Trust me, I speak from experience here.
Unless you're making a 48-hour short film and then you don't sleep very much. I can just speak from personal experience.
Exactly. No, and look, I did that. When I used to do, I also did special event operations. And some of these things were what they call food festivals. So we'd get San Vicente Boulevard from Friday night at 6 p.m. until Monday morning at 6 a.m. We had to close the street, erect 45 tents, put a fence up around the whole thing, lay down electrical, bring in toilets, security, all this kind of stuff. I sometimes would work a 30-hour shift and then go sleep for 12 or 14 hours, come back on Sunday afternoon and get the street back open by 6 a.m. Monday morning. I did that a number of times. And there's time to sleep, but for some, that's like working a week's work in about 3 days. So I would work an entire week in Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then go to bed on Monday and wake up sometime Tuesday. But the discipline necessary to do that is tantamount to your success, because if you don't have discipline, you're not going to make it very far, because they don't want people showing up with beer on your breath, with red eyes and stuff like that. Discipline is everything.
Yeah, to be able to do those kinds of hours. That shouldn't be the norm, right? It's obviously with special events, or I know when on productions I would work, even internationally, I'd be working all hours, right? Like catching sleep whenever I could.
Exactly.
But I think it goes to your point, like the times that I wasn't doing that, I was sleeping. I was getting the rest that I needed because I knew either that time was coming or it would just prepare me to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so with that, Hollywood is like, somebody quoted Hollywood to me as like a bowl of granola. You got your fruits, nuts, and your flakes, and all the rest of us are just sitting around in the milk. But the thing that rises us to the top is those that can persevere through the most challenging of scenarios and the things that fight you the most, and you're able to conquer those issues and those hurdles Those are the ones that survive.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to ask you a little bit about how you got started specifically as a location manager, right? Because you went through the theater program, you were doing lighting design,
Yeah.
right? You were doing a lot of that at
Well,
school as
and
well.
when I got out of college, most of my friends from high school had either finished their college already or had gone on and started professional work. Many of them were in art departments. So people called me up to be what's called an art dog, set decorator, set dresser, where I was hustling sets for a couple of 2-3 years on a couple of features, a couple of TV shows. Art department led to production, where I was a PA, rose right up to production coordinator, production manager in TV commercials. I did TV commercials for about 8-10 years and got very good at it. And I worked for some of the top TV producers. The Pitkas were one, and Mark Story was another, and a guy named Scott Miller. So I worked in production for a while, and then I found my way into locations because it always seemed like they would say, hey, our location scout found this great place, but we need a place across the street or next door that we can shoot one more scene. Can you go back to that location and see? So I'd do supplemental location work after the scout had wrapped.
As a production person, you were already hired as a
production manager or coordinator, even as a PA. So with Camera Will Travel, I'd go out to location, figure it out. I sometimes had to figure out parking and maps and other stuff like that, which is what a location manager does. And then there was a writer's strike in 89 or 90, and a lot of people were out of work, but I was finding work as a location manager, location scout, and that grew to location manager. Now I went into low budget, non-union horror and action films. So I did Friday the 13th, Part 9, Jason Goes to Hell, House 4, a half dozen other films where it was horror and action. It's like I kept calling it a meat grinder. You just grind it out.
And that was priced straight to video at that point, right? It was going
Some
straight.
of those Friday the 13th, I went to the theaters, but some of them direct to video, like a film called Drive, which was Mark Dacascos and a couple others, semi-well-known people, and Russell Crowe before he was big. So a lot of that stuff that went direct to video, we'd be out in Lancaster for 2 weeks, out in the dust and grime out there at Club Ed or something like that. Part of locations is knowing the territory. And that's one of the things I loved about the work I did in TV commercials, because I worked in about 40 states over those 8 or 10 years. I worked all over the country, traveled a lot. And that taught me a lot about taking a show on the road. When it came time to do locations on the road, that's when that experience came through, because I showed up in New Mexico to do a week's worth of shooting on a film with Matthew Broderick. And I was sent there to fix the problems of a former location manager who got fired. And I had to pick up all the pieces, but I had no prep time at all. And I just had to get there and do it. Part of the resourcing of that comes from the work I did in TV commercials, where I'd show up in, say, Rapid City, South Dakota, and I needed 4 PAs. I needed to find some people to build some sets. I needed casting, all local. How do you resource that? I learned. Same thing with locations, how you figure it out. Figure out the territory, figure out how it works, how it permits, how you get this done, how you get that done. Figure it out. And I've learned. It took a bit of a learning curve, and I'm pretty fast at it, and I'm pretty good at picking up on that stuff, but it takes hands-on experience to figure that out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm not sure I'm sure we talked at some point about my history, where I had also been a location manager earlier in my career for reality shows. That was where I found myself, because I worked as a locations production assistant on The Perfect Storm. Okay. In Gloucester, Massachusetts, as a local. It was 20 minutes from my parents' house. But it was for me, it was easy to get to that set, and I had set experience. So I got that job. But then because it said locations production assistant, now some of that job when I was locations production assistant was going to get buckets of chum so they could toss it over the side of the boat to attract the seagulls and things, right? That is not a glamorous job at all. In fact, it's rather disgusting. However, because it said locations production assistant on my resume, when reality TV was coming out, and I just moved out to LA, the year prior, suddenly all these jobs were available. And now I'm hired as a locations coordinator on this MTV show. I got to be location manager on the first Joe Millionaire in France. I did not speak a word of French other than oui. It's like I only knew very little words. And exactly, I would just say it with the accent. Everyone would be like, "Of course, you know what you're talking about." But I couldn't communicate. So this kind of goes to knowing your territory. Like, thankfully, we had locals that we had hired, and we knew we needed that, even just as translating PAs to help us and to do the job that we needed to do as Americans going into this foreign place and having to make a production happen, because it was still going on.
And part of that immersion into that is being very careful culturally to overstep your bounds as a production company. If you're gonna have a lot of noise, explosions, car wrecks, gunfights, all that stuff in people's neighborhoods or in front of their businesses, you have to understand what it takes to immerse yourself in their situation, I won't say their culture, but more or less in their culture, so that you are not being that ugly American who shows up and we're making Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible, get out of my way. No, just got to be respectful, and because you're not going to get very much help from people if you just bowl them over. So part of the diplomacy of locations is being that fine line between I've got to look out for the needs of the production, but yet I've got to look out for the needs and wants of the people that live there, people we're dealing with, having business dealings with, and or just more or less the locals, and how you interface with them, and how successful you are is how well you're able to interface with the locals. You're going to pull off your movie, you're going to get your shots, but how you leave is everything to the success of your job. Because if you leave and they say, "Oh, we'll have you back any day," you done good. But if they're like, "I don't want to see the likes of Hollywood ever again," and trust me, I've been in the neighborhoods and I've been in small cities, small towns and cities where they're like, "You know what? Warner Brothers came here 10 years ago and we don't want to see you guys ever again." And we did a film called The Magestic up in a town called Ferndale, which is just south of Eureka, up in northern North California. And that was the case on The Magestic. We had a local up there who had to win over the town for about a month and a half of finessing, because a film called Outbreak had been there 10 years prior and they left a mess behind. And this town really didn't want to see Hollywood do that again. They were able to overcome that, say, "I'm sorry" on their behalf. We're not going to do it that way. And they did it the right way, leaving everybody with a much better taste in their mouth after we left. And that's important.
That's amazing. So you graduated, maybe graduated isn't the right word, but you moved from commercials to features. Is that sort of what the trajectory was?
Low budget horror non-union. And then about 96 or so, a colleague came to me and said, "Look, I got an opportunity on a union show here. It was DreamWorks' first television show, and I'll get you into union." So I was able to join the Teamsters Local 399 as a location assistant, because I had to join as an assistant, put in 200 days as an assistant, and then I could graduate to the key role, which I did pretty quickly. But it was on High Incident, which was produced by DreamWorks SKG it was about a small town police story in more or less the San Fernando Valley. And it was high profile. It had a lot of shoot 'em up and things like that. But it was a good show, and it had amazing showrunners. So it was a good experience.
That's great. And it was the first one for DreamWorks. So was there any more attention on that because it was the first one from DreamWorks that you felt?
We did have Steven Spielberg on the set every once in a while, I came up to him at craft services. "Excuse me, are you on the crew?" And they turned and looked at me and went, "Never mind. I got it. Hi, nice to meet you. You can fire me right now, or I can just go back to the office and wait." He goes, "What for?" "I just asked you if you were your..."
Did you ask him legitimately, or did you know he was Steven Spielberg? And
no, I saw a person who I did not know, and we were pretty tight on our set because we had weapons. We had automatic weapons and stuff on the set. So I was pretty tight about who's visiting. And this is somebody I didn't know from behind. I said, "Excuse me." Then he turns around and is like, "Oh, who are you?" I'm
That's
fine.
awesome.
How are you? No.
That's great. So you did your 200 days. You did 200 days, and then you became a location manager at that point?
Yeah. Some friends of mine were were doing a movie. Luckily and happily, there was about 20 people I did through my high school who I've known very well, because we used to do plays and musicals till dawn, it seems. They were all in their own right, writers, producers, hair, makeup, wardrobe, scenic designer, teamster drivers, location managers. And one of them wrote a script called the Bijou, later became the Magestic. Got a very well-known director named Frank Darabont to direct it. But everybody involved, like I said, writer, director, producer, designer, production designer, costume designer, key hair, key makeup, all went to Hollywood High together. All of us, 25 of us. They called us the Hollywood High Mafia. Now, I don't know what the mafia thing meant. It really was no negative connotation, but I begged, literally, and I actually did my own homework for 6 months before I got the job, did my own research and homework on where to place this film, which ended up in Ferndale. When Frank Darabont and Greg Melton, the production designer, found out that I'd already doing prep work, they did ask me to do the show. So I was able to join the union. I was able to join as a location manager my first time in the chair.
For the Majestic. It was for the Majestic.
And not only that, I was working with old friends from the early 70s who I met when I was 15, 14 years old. And they're buddies. They're all friends. We all came up through the ranks together. Frank Darabont, who you may know from Shawshank Redemption, Green Mile, Frank and I used to hustle sets for Greg Melton when we were in the art department. So we would hustle sets, go here and there, work on set. And I was working side by side with Frank Darabont when he was not who he is today. And that for me was a thrill, because I was with old friends.
Yes, you probably felt support too, right? You felt safe in that environment?
Look, if I was going to fall, there was 3-4 people who would catch me if there was a problem. And never did that really come to pass, but there were times when people said, hey, John, listen, let me, give me some direction and stuff. But that in and of itself was a thrill. I was with my friend.
That's great. So you had identified Ferndale as the place to look. Was that sort of?
It was one of a dozen. What was it? Astoria, Oregon.
Where they shot Goonies and
exactly,
Kindergarten Cop. I visited up there once. It's beautiful.
Yeah, Kindergarten Cop, I think you said, right? Yeah. So there was, I already identified, but they actually hired Lori Bolton, who is pretty much a #1 location scout for features in LA. And Lori found the same things that I found. Of course, I handed her a pile of research materials before she went up. But when it came time to them for tapping people for the job, Greg Melton was able to present me to Frank, and Frank said, can he do it? And Greg said, I think he can. And so they gave me the chance.
And because they had the history with you already, right? Because they had known you in the past, that probably was an easier conversation, is my guess.
And they also knew that if I said I'm going to do something, I'll do it. My first order of business was to deliver the Chinese theater, because the movie opens at the Chinese theater. And, there's must be 6 pages at the Chinese, both interior and exterior. Nobody had filmed inside the Chinese theater in 35, 40 years. And they're right in the middle of the building of the big retail complex next door, Hollywood and Highland.
Right.
I got them to allow us to film inside and out. They allowed us to cut down 3 ficus trees, which had been covering up the edifice of the Chinese theater for 40 years. They're coming down in a few months anyway. So they were able to let us take them down, because removing the ficus trees allowed us to do the very early version of CGI of we had a trolley car that had to pass through one of the frames. And to do that, it would be a lot cleaner and easier and a lot less expensive without those ficus trees there. And they're coming down in a few months anyway, so I was able to convince them to move up the calendar. So I looked like a hero. First thing I did within the first week or two was delivered to the Chinese theater. A little later, they gave us the permission for the trees and other stuff down the road. And that started setting the concrete on my participation in this film, being a significant contribution to the overall look of the show.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about what that process was for you in terms of convincing whoever it was to allow that to happen? Because I imagine it was a long discussion and negotiations maybe. How does that work?
It was several meetings. I, first of all, took 2 meetings about 3 weeks apart where I set forth what we'd like to do, let them mull it over, and then they come back and say, let's talk some more. So the second time I go in with a plan, and I had a producer in tow, the line producer. And we had already gone in with a plan. All right, we need to get in there the night before, pre-rig and light. We need to shoot on day 1 outside the theater. And then on day 2, we're going inside, and we need to do X, Y, and Z inside. And then the night of day 2, we need to put everything back and let you open to start going to movie shows on day 3. So you go in with a plan, then they take it back to their people. And then after the 3rd meeting, we did that one more time, just solidify, and Man Theaters had some questions. And then the 4th time they called me up and said, it looks like this is something we can do, at which they set a price. And at that point, I wasn't going to negotiate because they said yes. And
yeah.
Don't take that with a gift horse. And so it was a series of meetings. But again, you have to have a plan. And that means with the first AD, the line producer, the set decorator, all these people that will need input into what you're going to talk to them about, get your ducks lined up, and then go into the meeting. So prepared. It's got to be prepared.
And so whatever that budget number was, so you get told a budget number, you then have to bring that number back to the line producer and say, this is what it is. If you want the Chinese theater, this is what you have to pay, right? So, and then they will either say yes or no in that part of the process.
Yeah,
right?
Once again, they were not in a position to say, oh, I can't do that, unless it was $200,000. Yeah. But for me, $25,000 a night for each night of screenings, it was
iconic, like truly iconic location. It just sort of like, there's nothing else really like that. And that movie, it was a period piece movie, right? When you were talking about the trolley, that obviously didn't exist in.
Yeah, it was set in 1951. So that meant period cars and all that kind of stuff. And as a film, whenever you make a movie in period, you're going to have additional space necessary when you have a lot of extras, especially a lot of extras. And on the Magestic, we had hundreds. You're going to have to set aside space for hair, makeup, and wardrobe, because everybody will need to have. We had something like an entire 2 trucks full of hair and makeup stations that had to be unloaded and wired up in a tent for everybody to get their hair and makeup done. Then there was wardrobe. We had all kinds of tents for changing, 2 different 50-foot box trucks with just the background actors' wardrobes. So I need extra parking space. I need lots more tents and more crew to help set up all of these support areas, and then extras and places for catering. If you have a crew of 150, crew of 200, and then you have 200-300 extras, you're feeding 500 people at lunch. And that means you need places for them to sit. Not only that, all the support services, bathrooms and trash and other things, and security, parking. Parking was a big deal when you had that many extras. But the period picture pretty much triples the amount of support area and space you need because of all the hair, makeup, and wardrobe necessary to get all the background people up to look.
Right, and holding for all those people too, if they're not one in the same place, right?
Well, a lot of times I like to set them at catering, just because you've got tables and chairs
You've
set
already
up.
got the space, yeah, right.
Yeah, but there are not. Sometimes you're not so lucky.
Yeah, but also if you have 200, extras or a background, you also have 150 crew. Like you have to have space for 350 people. Like then it just even grows even more. So it's interesting in hearing that. What is your process like when you So let's keep it in the Chinese theater realm. So you went, you identified it, you found it, you locked it. Now what? Right now it's like,
Well,
we've decided to go. What happens?
Then you go find your parking lots, making sure you can get all the equipment as close as you can, that it won't be in the way of any of your shots. And then I went across the street to the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel and set up support areas for catering, hair, makeup, and wardrobe. And so that was the next step. Then we had to close down Hollywood Boulevard between Orange and Highland. And this is prior to the Hollywood Highland complex opening. So they're not necessarily geared up like they are today with the Oscars and all the award shows and all the red carpet events that they have at the Chinese and whatnot that they have today. Back then, it was a new thing. So we had to go talk to every merchant up and down the boulevard for one long block to say, hey, we want to close the boulevard after 7 p.m. And we paid everyone. But then, of course, you get people that are greedy and they want more. And at which point, and one guy in particular, he wanted triple what I was paying everybody. And I told everybody how much I was paying everyone. One guy wanted a lot more. And I said, at the end of the day, I'm coming to you. I'm not required to give you anything. So if you want to gouge me, that's fine. It's your prerogative. I could opt to say, you know what? I'm not paying you. So there was one guy who didn't get paid, but 40 other people did because they agreed. And it was a fair amount for 90% of them who wouldn't be affected after 7 p.m. anyway, which is when we were closing the boulevard. So there was that too. And then the politics of the boulevard in terms of the permits, other mitigating factors. Highland Avenue is actually California Highway 170. So I had to deal with the state permit in closing that part of the boulevard. I had to deal with a Film LA, or what at the time was EIDC permit on Hollywood Boulevard. There were other mitigating permits that were necessary as well. And so besides all that, then you have the curveballs that come out of left field. Somebody that comes up and says, I'm having my kid's birthday party that the same day you're doing your thing at the Chinese theater. What do I do? And I foot the bill for a new location for their birthday party. You do stuff like that to make it work. So everybody's happy.
Right. You have to get, and by the way, that's just one location, right? You did an entire feature of however many days, however many locations. You have to do that at every single place.
Exactly. And then sometimes you're in a residential neighborhood where you've got a lot of rich people who are finicky. They don't want to, not in my, what we call NIMBY, not in my backyard. And a lot of times you find people who are just like, I don't mind you making a movie, but you have to do it on my street. So yeah, you do run into that. And yeah, it can be voluminous. I think on a film I did called Sunset Boulevard, where at one location alone, because of seeing things in an alley and then out in front, I had 50 location agreements to be signed and people to be paid just because we're impacting or seeing their edifice, their store, their facade in the film. And it was, by the way, set in 1972. So all of those 50 places had to be redressed in 1972. So we had 50 contracts. Now, contracts involve not only the paperwork that has to be signed, you have insurance, checks, I-9s, W-4s, all this paperwork that has to be done just for one location. We had 50 of them on this one location at Sunset and Gardner, that what we call Guitar Alley, by the Guitar Center.
Sure.
50 location agreements.
Wow.
And all of them had to be paid. So, yeah, on that job, I actually gave myself the position called locations coordinator, because all I was doing was paperwork. No, I was hardly ever getting out there. I was sending all the minions out to run around, do the footwork. But on that show, I was literally pulling paperwork. There was a stack of paperwork this thick that I turned in as all my contracts and agreements after that show was done. So it can be voluminous.
Wow. And I'm sure today, because I remember having to do start paperwork and having literally like a stack that I walk in and I'd be like, oh man, this is going to be a tough day.
Yeah.
I just have to sit and sign a bunch of stuff. And that just was the job, right?
Exactly.
But now there's DocuSign, right? There's all sort of these, which hopefully will save some trees in the long run.
And then you have accountants that have their own idiosyncrasies and finicky. Oh, it has to be like this and it has to be like that.
Yep.
And one thing I've learned is you do it the way accounting wants it. Otherwise, they'll make your life miserable.
Because if they then take it back, it creates more work for you anyway. So might as well get that system down. Yeah. And I think that also kind of highlights being part of a team, right? So even if somebody has that very kind of specific way it needs to be done, a lot of different departments have that, right? And you're having to satisfy that. And I think I want to talk about your reality show career as well, because obviously that's how you and I met, but you were doing Fear Factor.
Yeah.
And some of those locations with the stunts and things, I don't know if you were involved in Vegas and like the pyramid.
Vegas was my baby. That was, matter of fact, the final stunt, which was the slide for life down the Luxor. My idea.
Man.
And on top of it, by the way, it was the only idea I gave Fear Factor that they took. I gave them several ideas, but the Luxor slide for life, that was my idea. And boy, was that a thrill. Oh my God. To stick your head out the pyramid and look down that building. Oh my God. What
I rewatched that recently. I was showing my son, my 11-year-old son, because his mother worked on that show as doing craft services. And so I was like, oh, that mama worked on this, watch this. And watching that particular episode, I was like, because we had just been to Vegas. I'm like, look at this. They're sliding down the Luxor. It's crazy.
And on top of it, we also opened the show. The B stunt, I believe, was at the A stunt, was at the Fremont Place. So we started at Fremont Place, and then they moved to the Mandalay Bay, and we did our final. It was the fourth stunt on that show, because I think it was a 90-minute episode, where I think he bet his whole winnings of $50,000 on one game of blackjack, and he did not win. And because of that, now we had on top of the hotel, of course, it was a trade out. It was a business trade off, where the hotel gave us rooms and all this kind of stuff to trade off. With that, we also had local hires in the hotel, security, engineers, other stuff, because literally for the slide for life, they took the entire penthouse completely, even the carpet came up, because we had to bolt a descender rig, which is a rig that has reels that pull up and down, that bolt it to the floor. So they had to pull the carpeting up and everything, but we had engineers and all this kind of stuff. And I kept writing the hotel for the next week or two after we wrapped, saying, let me get your staffing bill. And they just ignored me. And I went to my boss. I said, I can't get them to send the staffing. He goes, John, they just won $50,000 on one hand of blackjack. They ain't going to send that bill, because we had to play a legitimate game of blackjack. It was not for show. It was a legitimate game.
For gambling rules, right? Legal.
Exactly that. Reasons. We went back. I did. Trying to remember another show I did there. It might have been Fear Factor too, where we had, it was Fear Factor, where we had reels on a slot machine that had to be changed. The Nevada Gaming Commission had to be involved in that. Anytime you're opening up a slot machine and messing with the stuff, the Gaming Commission has to become involved. And it's a very strictly regulated, people watching over your shoulder all the time. So it was a very carefully regulated scenario that had to be adhered to the letter T. And yeah, so Vegas was a lot of fun. I will say, though, on Fear Factor, because of my experience in feature films and other stuff, I brought a number of significantly new and exciting, visually exciting locations to the table. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, dams, the Santa Fe Dam, the Tahunga Dam, brought those into play that hadn't been on the plate in years past. So I significantly contributed to the look of the show, taking a step up in its visuals. And I was told by several people, including one or two of the EPs, were like, your contribution has been enormous. That was in season 3. And I finished with season 6, which I believe was their final full NBC season 6.
Wow. And then, yeah, that was a really big reality show too. But you also did smaller ones like Audrina, right? When I hired you, it essentially was, we need these places in Los Angeles, and I knew based on your experience, like you could lock in like STK, a very high end restaurant, right? These places that perhaps we wouldn't be able to go in if I just called up myself. But with your relationships and with your knowledge, right, and with the career that you had, I knew that you'd be able to pick up the phone and be able to get us what we needed. And if you couldn't lock in whatever that specific thing was, you had an alternate that was a very good alternate that ended up becoming the primary sometimes.
And you have to do that because you can't put your eggs in one basket and just hope. I hope they allow us, and maybe they'll, you got to have a backup. You got to have a backup.
Yeah. I want to jump back a little bit to your commercial career. We glazed over it a little bit, but I seem to remember you telling me you had a nickname on those commercials. And I feel like that probably helped in your career path as well, right? What was that?
My nickname became General Grant.
General Grant.
It was a move. We were in Vail, Colorado. It was for a Sprite commercial. We were the only thing we hadn't shot yet after several days of principal photography. The only thing we hadn't shot was about 10 of these shots like this. It was for Sprite International. So we had 10 local casting skiers, more or less, advanced skiers, who had to do these drinking shots. But we needed a blue backdrop with some puffy clouds. For 4 straight days, we'd get up to the top of Vail Mountain, Far East Summit. We had an entire snowcat full of equipment. Half the crew was skiing into location, taking ski lifts and their ski gear. And we'd get up there and we're fogged in, clouded in, and the weather report saying it's going to be this way all day. So we just send the crew out skiing. I'd head back to the hotel, and we just sit in the hotel and look at weather reports every 2 hours. So for several days, we were doing this, and finally we had to make a plan to get ourselves the hell out of Vail and to a soundstage in Los Angeles as the backup, where we had a painter standing by to paint the cyclorama, the clouds, and airline reservations for the crew to get back a day early, all this kind of stuff. And so finally the last day, 10 o'clock in the morning, they said, okay, pull the trigger. And by about 10 a.m., they pulled the trigger. By 1 p.m., I had 35 cast and crew on planes on the way home. An entire cube truck full of equipment, 3.5 tons of camera gear, props, all kinds of wardrobe and ski gear and all this kind of stuff. And then all the crew and their foul weather gear and their ski equipment. We put it, a PA and I drove down to Denver, loaded 3 cargo containers, got up to Los Angeles, where a cube truck met me at the airport. We met the cargo containers at the cargo terminal, loaded all the gear into a cube truck there. The PAs drove to Hollywood and set up the soundstage overnight. I went home, went to bed, came in at 7 a.m. the next day. We had a camera department set up. We had a wardrobe department set up, prop department set up, because it was a Sprite commercial. So we had lots of product. And all their foul weather gear was lined up straight down the middle of the soundstage. So we open up the elephant doors at 7 a.m. The director walks in. He goes, how'd you do it? How'd you do it? Your name is now General Grant. And so moving 3.5 tons of equipment from Vail to Los Angeles literally overnight earned me the title of General Grant, because there wasn't a lot of people who would pull that off.
And 35 people too. It's like the people, the stuff, all of that.
Well, 10 of them were local from Vail, who were cast as actors in the thing. These are ski instructors, they're bartenders, waiters, and they had to be flown to Los Angeles, where they got making 2 or 3 nights in LA. Oh, they were thrilled. Wow. But anyway, from that moment, I was known as General Grant. Not too many people call me that anymore, but it was still flattering, because logistics was everything on that maneuver. And it
worked. It all worked. Each one of those things, something could have gone wrong, right? But it didn't.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, spot on. Because if even one of the things goes wrong, where's our equipment? It's stuck in Denver. It'll be here tonight.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Great.
Yeah, I'm sure you faced a number of those things in your career as well, like where things didn't go according to plan.
Like a friend of mine, the guy who got me on Fear Factor, did the movie for California Adventure Soaring, which is that immersive hang gliding ride.
At Disney, yes, yeah.
Yeah. And so an IMAX film had to be shot with the element of the flying part of that. They had days like down at Anzo Borrego or down in Temecula where they wake up and they can't get the hot air balloons in the air. Okay, let's just go back to the hotel.
So that was
Okay.
all set up. It was all planned. It wasn't during real events. That was all set up.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Anzo Borrego, the flying over the, matter of fact, my colleague is a guy, they fly over him on a river where he's fly fishing, and that was all set up. And with a special helicopter, the helicopter had to have an IMAX camera mounted up on the nose, but it had to be extended 10 feet forward of the nose because of seeing the rotors in frame. So that had to all be balanced. The FAA had to get involved because the helicopter had to be rebalanced. The propellers had to be realigned because of the extra weight. 400-pound camera up on the nose of the helicopter. But they had this thing happen a number of times where weather was not participating. So they just say wrap and come back the next day and try it again. The one in particular was the hot air balloon sequence. They tried for 6 days to go get that. And they kept saying, okay, I guess we'll try it again tomorrow. But see, I didn't have too many of those in my career where we go back to the hotel and just hang out. Because in production, you just don't go hang out. You start going back and having a beer. You're working. Locations, maybe not so much, but sometimes yes, sometimes no. You take advantage of the time you have to do whatever. If catch up on paperwork, catch up on petty cash, whatever you could do. They're paying you.
Well, and the job's hard enough, right? I'm talking about those overnights and doing those things, like as those things happen in life. When you have the time where you don't have to really do something like that, it's good to have a little bit of that time.
Like on Sunset Strip, I said, look, I'm going to need 2 full days just to coordinate my paperwork. And I'm going to do it at home where I'm not going to be getting phone calls. I'm not going to be people walking into my office and interrupting me because I'm doing very specific paperwork processing that everything has to be done. Everything has to be
to the accountant's level.
And so don't interrupt me. So I said, I'm going to need 2 full days where I'm left alone. So I negotiated to do that over a weekend so I could be there when people were walking in the door and things like that. But I did get 2 weekend days off of it, which is that time and a half because I just had to be left alone. So I would do it right as opposed to getting interrupted every 5 minutes, which was what was happening.
So I know we're running short on time here, but probably maybe next 5 minutes or so, wrap it up. But I did want to just briefly talk about, so you retired in what year? You retired from?
My last show was America's Next Top Model, and that was in 2017, I believe.
2017. And obviously you've had some health concerns. You were telling me a little bit before we started rolling. And if you're okay talking about that at all, what that is like for you now and looking back at your career.
Well, first of all, I'll tell anyone that smokes, don't smoke. I smoked for 40 years, and that caught up to me. It started as COPD, graduated to emphysema, and then got worse from there. And last fall, about a year ago, we're in October right now, about a year ago in October, I noticed there was some issues, and they took some x-rays, and it already progressed to stage 4. So I knew I had emphysema, but I didn't know how bad it was. And then they took some pictures and other stuff, and they figured it out. But it was already too late. And I like I said, I smoked for 40 years. And I'm not faulting anyone. I'm not faulting Philip Morris. It's my own fault. But yeah, I am dealing with that. It afforded me an early retirement. And thank God the Teamsters have such a very robust retirement package. Their rules are decent when it comes down to, look, Social Security deemed me disabled in 2019. So I started getting pension back paid from 2020 by the Teamsters. But I also started getting Social Security disability paying in 2019 and on. So that's my income now. It's Social Security and my pension. So I can thank the Teamsters for a very robust pension package, and luckily and happily. Now, I only had 24 years in the union. If I had 10 more, my pension would be a little bit bigger. But with that, I'm not bemoaning anything because I'm lucky. I'm lucky. I missed COVID and I missed the 2 strikes, which have been hell on my colleagues and just horrendous. I'm hearing horror stories of losing your HMO, losing your homes, having to take your kids out of their schools and put them in the public schools and other stuff. And I don't want to say thank my lucky stars, but I'm just really lucky I didn't have to endure what a number of my colleagues are having to go through right now. It's not easy, the medical issues I'm dealing with. And I am literally past 3 expiration dates when doctors have said you got between 1 and 3 years. Past that. A year ago, doctors said come fall last year, things are going to start getting dicey. They did and they didn't, but I'm still here. So it hasn't been easy, but I'm still here. I'm still here. Good times and bum times. I've seen them all in my dear. I'm still here. Reefers and vino, rescuers, religion and beer, and I'm here. I've run the gamut A to Z, 3 cheers, and damn it, say la vie. I made it through all of last year, and I'm here. Lord knows at least I was there, and I'm here. Look who's here. I'm still here. That's Stephen Sondheim I'm quoting. Yeah. Sorry, I got off on a Stephen Sondheim tangent.
Okay. And going back to theater and musical rights, or again, your background here. So it all comes full circle.
I'm a huge Sondheim fan, but even bigger John Williams fan. And I was able to go to the Hollywood
talk
Bowl.
about that. Please talk about that.
Able to go to the Hollywood Bowl for 40 straight years to John Williams' Night at the Movies, maestro of the films. And because I've adored his music scores ever since I saw the movie Towering Inferno. And I was like, what is this? I stayed through the movie a second time just to hear his opening theme with the helicopters flying into San Francisco. I've been thrilled to be present at 40 years of his concerts. And this year in particular, the Hollywood Bowl picked up on this, and they actually sent a film crew and put together a 40-second little video clip of me talking about my time at the Hollywood Bowl. And I brought groups of 60 people when you could get tickets for $1 up in the nosebleeds. So now they have a great situation for people in a wheelchair, handicap seats, which is great, and handicap parking and all this kind of stuff, which I've taken advantage of. And the Hollywood Bowl came in and videotaped this stuff earlier this year, and they ended up with a 40-second little sound piece that's just beautiful, just beautiful.
Oh, that's awesome.
So anyway, it thrills me because that Hollywood Bowl, I graduated from high school on that stage. So that to me is very special. It's very special.
Yeah, absolutely. And to go to that event, I love that event. I've gone a few times myself. It's really a wonderful.
The first note of any Star Wars composition, 8,000 lightsabers come alive.
Amazing.
Yeah, it truly is. And the lady from PR with the bowl immediately picked up on my situation with John Williams and said, let's get this on tape. And they did. And that was a thrill.
Cool.
Hi, my name is John, and I'm from Hollywood, California. And my favorite thing to do is come to the John Williams concert with the LA Philharmonic here at the Hollywood Bowl. The Hollywood Bowl is very special to me. I graduated from high school on this stage. So to come to shows here is also part of that fabric of my childhood. I started coming in 1984. The minute the first note of a John Williams composition comes on, 8,000 lightsabers become lit in a nanosecond, and it's really special. This is now my 40th anniversary of seeing the John Williams show. This is my place, so I'm thrilled, and here I am tonight to hear the music of the movies from the maestro himself.
That's so amazing. Oh, John, thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving me the time today and talking to me about your history. We didn't even go into the Rose Bowl, the parade, you have such an amazing backstory, and I really appreciate you sharing what you did today and those highlights. Is there anything that you would leave a younger person? You were giving some little tidbits of advice. Is there anything that you would leave with to give somebody?
Keep your nose clean. do good work, and remain disciplined throughout your career so that the runner doesn't stumble. Cross your T's, dot your I's. Paperwork is all important. Payroll and petty cash and all that paperwork and stuff through accounting. Follow it fastidiously. Read your background material, but just follow through on that stuff thoroughly, because sometimes it's going to come get you. Don't let frustration overwhelm you. It can be a downfall. And those are all just the little things. But overall, be prepared. Be prepared and do your homework and do good work. Do good work and make Hollywood look good. I think one overriding thing is don't screw it up for the next generation. Do it right. Do it right, and so that people don't have to come back and clean up your mess after you've been there. And that's really important because you got to leave, because Hollywood sometimes leaves a stink behind. You don't want to leave that person that leaves that stink. You know,
the experience you had on the Magestic in Ferndale, right?
Exactly.
From
and
the
I am
outbreak
sorry we
team.
didn't get a chance to talk about volunteerism, but what I will say is that volunteerism is the backbone to many operations and many philanthropic organizations. And if you got the time and the inkling and the talent, be a part of it. I did 11 Tournament of Roses parades as a white suitor, which are the 1,000 volunteers that make it happen. And I wouldn't look back for a nanosecond. I had the best time in the world putting on the granddaddy of all parades. So sorry we didn't get to talk more about that, but
No,
I do thank you for your time and trouble.
I feel like we could probably talk for another 8 hours and still just be scratching the surface, right? It's like you have an entire career of all these really amazing stories, and I really appreciate you sharing just a smattering of them in this short. Smattering, whatever the word is, but to give your time to this, and I really appreciate it. Talking to you and getting to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's great to see you again too. And by the way, I should point out, I also got a Cola Award nomination for Audrina as well.
Yeah, no, I remember it. It's so
Yeah.
amazing. You did. It was amazing work. It's amazing work. It was wonderful working with you. I have to say that just as a colleague too, and someone who worked with you, it was a joy working with you. You were always happy with jokes, your puns, all of it. I'm a big pun fan myself.
They called me Attila the Pun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. And I'm gonna wrap up here and say thank you. I'm gonna take you off the stage and just thank our viewers here. Thank you so much for joining Behind the Lens. I'm your host, Carl Hansen, and hope to see you next time. Thanks so much.